We are recording. Okay. Um, I'm just glad you guys are here. Really glad you're here. I'm glad I'm here. Um, and welcome back to another year of School of Life. I want to give you an overview of what we're going to be doing. Most of you have been with us through the ride, but last year I started writing this book about the stuff we've been talking about at School of Life for all these years, and all last year was about just different chapters of the book, which was kind of interesting how we did that. There were like 8 sessions of School of Life, and there were 8 chapters that we got through, and there are, I think, 4 more. So there's 4 for this semester. So I don't know what we're going to do next semester, but today I want to have a conversation and read the chapter on, I don't know what to call it exactly. I started with befriending the unknown, which sounds really mature and really serene. And then I wanted to say that I thought that just makes it sound too easy. So it might end up being breaking up with knowing or breaking up with certainty or getting sober from having to know all the things. Maybe that's another chapter title. Just to recap, so we talked about what the soul is, all the different qualities of the soul. So the first part of the book is just kind of getting the information out. Here's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the soul, and here's some of the things that I think about the soul that aren't really talked about that much. You know, we talk a lot about the soul in theological terms, or eternal sorts of things, more theological and theoretical, but how does the soul talk? How does it act? How does it move? What's the nature of it when we're not necessarily attaching it to a larger ideology? So we figured out, I think, that the soul is subterranean. It just doesn't talk the way we think it ought to talk. It moves in ways that are unusual. So if we're not used to it, then we're missing a lot of things that our own soul's trying to, tell us. It's whole, which was kind of a big deal to me. I always thought, none of us were whole, but the idea that we have inside of us a kind of wholeness that has always been there, or has been growing, or has been sort of there to support and resource us. It's just, it's just too much to summarize all of those. There's just a lot in there. It's countercultural, it's embodied, and it's a little bit wild. So then I'm switching to what I'm calling the book is more of a field guide, like for people that are practicing, trying to move from a ego-centered life, or a life that's based on kind of the best you can do, to a more soul-centered life. Then there are some things you ought to know, and some things that your soul is going to lead you into. And so if you know that that's going to happen, you can be on the lookout for them. So it's kind of like if you've ever used a field guide, if you've gone out hiking or something, it's like this little book you bring in case you're interested in wildflowers or birds or different terrain or whatever. You just go out and hike, and then you see something and you go, I wonder what that is. And if you have a field guide, you can look it up and say, oh, that's what that is. That's a green-throated warbler or whatever. Or that little flower is this, not that. So field guide kind of is for people who are practicing, that's written by people who are practicing about what they're finding on the road. And so I'm hoping that this has been what School of Life has been about from the beginning. And so the second part of the book is, if you could sign up for this gig, then you need to know that certain things your soul will be moving you into certain competencies, making you aware of building certain skills. And so there's probably a gazillion of them, but the ones that I have the energy to write about are this first one is learning about not knowing. And I've talked about this many times in School of Life, but have expanded that. Next time we'll talk about the skill of withness, the ability to be with yourself in a way that facilitates reattaching to your soul. And then the next chapter will have something to do with faith, trust, and believing, and how much actually being a human being takes a lot of faith and trust and vulnerability. And then I'm going to throw in a chapter on practices that I've heard of or that I've used that help with this whole deal. I've been reading this book this summer that's been rocking my world. It's called Nature and the Human Soul by Bill Plotkin. And he does a huge developmental model for how you raise human beings, basically, to be soul-centric is his term, versus egocentric. And it's, he's an expert, so he gets to write these things, but I love the term soul-centric. And so I might steal it or, attribute it or something. But what we're talking about here is most of us have grown up in an egocentric society, raised by egocentric people, in a system where we really don't know how to be soulful in any kind of organic or natural way. And so we grow up the best we can. But as we get older, like our soul's always calling us to more wholeness, more authenticity, and we don't know what that is. And it goes against a lot of what we've been raised with. So this rub is where we find ourselves in. So shifting out of that egocentric way of living costs us some stuff, or at least we think it costs us. We're afraid it's going to cost us everything. It's pretty scary. But in order to make the shift, we're kind of doing a change in management, so to speak. And so it puts us in turmoil as the shift is happening, even though we're asking for it, even though that's what we desperately want. And so we get in this situation where the tectonic plates of our lives are kind of shifting, and it feels weird. And so if we know what some of these skills are, we can be more intentional about yielding to them and taking care of ourselves differently when things come our way that the soul is asking us to adapt to or to learn with. Okay, so I guess I'm going to read, but this is really dense material. As I was reading it out loud, I just thought, oh my God, I'm either going to put them completely to sleep or drown them. And so
wait, let me get comfortable.
Yeah, no, don't you fall asleep on me. So I would like to maybe just leave it open to if I say something you don't get, or it kind of went over your head and you're like, wait a minute, say that again, or what do you mean by that? Let's just go ahead and do that, because otherwise it's sort of like from a fire hose and you're like, okay, I think I'll just lay down now and miss a lot of what's going on there. Okay, so please interrupt if you want to. Any questions or anything?
Is it because of the nature of the subject, or what makes this one dense? So far your writing style is so accessible. What would you say makes this one dense? Is it the not
Well, maybe you'll find out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Strap in.
Yeah. I don't know. Just as I'm reading it, I'm like, oh man. Because I remember writing it just thinking there's so much that could be said, so much that could just be broken down in self-help terms or like psychological therapized terms. Like I could do a lot of teaching about it, which just makes me want to stick a pen in my eye. So I was trying to express it in ways where it ended up condensing a lot of things that maybe could be expanded or explained. And so part of what I want to do today is figure out what those things are. I think I have an idea of what they are, but so if you're kind of looking at me like this, just stop me. And then I don't know how we'll manage the time. When people start arriving, I guess is when we'll have to wrap up. But it might be 10:30, 10:45 even. Okay. So are you ready? Anything? And while I'm talking, here's some questions you can be thinking. What kinds of uncertainties disturb you in a way that kind of either keep you up at night or cause you to obsess or get you in the spinning mode? You can be thinking about that. And when that happens, what do you reach for, and does that work for you? Okay? Okay. Start with a quote, which I'm sure you've heard before. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in the worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. That was written by Theodore Roosevelt in 1910. Let's hear it for those who are daring greatly. We love them, we write stories and make movies about them, we celebrate them and honor them. We want to be them, most of us, some of us. Some of us don't, and I'm just going to say it, I'm one of them. I may be a seeker, a natural pilgrim, but I'm no adventurer. If there's an arena and I have a choice, I'm sitting in the stands biting my fingernails. If there's a contest involving dust and sweat and blood, I'm not your girl. Sorry. I admit it, scaredy cat's my name, and existential angst is my game. It's true. Maybe it's how I was born. Oversensitive, introspective, middle child, naturally insecure. Maybe it was the way I was raised. Of course, I was too young to remember being an infant, but being older than my younger siblings, I had a chance to observe my mother's parenting philosophies. Doubtless, she learned them on her own, having been born the oldest daughter among 6 children in a sod house on the Nebraska prairie. My mother didn't finish high school, but returned home at the age of 15 to help raise her siblings after the birth of her younger sister, so I can forgive her ignorance in regard to child development. Her attitude towards spoiling, for example, meant that even as infants, we were left in our cribs to cry ourselves to sleep most of the time. And if we took too long, maybe we just weren't crying hard enough, so a swift swat on the butt would hasten the process. Weirdly, I witnessed no malice or anger about this, no baby shaking or loss of control. It was simply a practical way to get babies to sleep, as horrifying as that sounds to me now. Potty training went much the same way. After a certain age, it was time to be out of diaper, so every accident was met the same way, with a swift swat on the butt, until we eventually put 2 and 2 together and only went potty in the potty, and not in our training pants. Again, no malice, just no awareness whatsoever of what happens in a child's nervous system when they receive a blow, however mild, in response to natural bodily functions. I can't speak for my siblings, but for myself, I'm pretty sure it left me feeling jumpy and insecure, uncomfortable in my own skin, and constantly wondering if I was doing something wrong. As a child, I was bewildered by how the world works and too afraid to ask. I remember one day riding in the front seat with my mom through heavier than normal traffic. I worried that the cars coming toward us were going to veer into our path at any second and we would crash. My mother saw me flinching every 2 seconds and kindly told me about lanes and traffic laws and how, if everyone just obeys the rules, we can all get home safely. Who knew? Those days are long gone, as is my mother, whom we all love dearly and miss daily. She simply didn't know what she didn't know. My jacked up nervous system, however, stayed with me throughout my life, and the resultant existential angst fueled my earnest search for an ontological home. a home for my sense of being. Which is how I found myself a fervent and very grateful member of the Jesus movement, and which is why, after the collapse of my faith system, I felt as if I was coming apart. My faith gave me an anchor that grounded me at the core. I truly felt that I had been saved not from the fires of hell, but from the fear that resided deep in my bones, a fear which seemed a lot more threatening to me at the time than the threat of eternal damnation. Faith gave me an identity in exchange for my angst and a remedy for the pervasive sense of badness I constantly carried with me. This is what I mean by existential angst, or angst. I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce that. Vague and unspecific, rarely experienced directly, but lacing the primal nervous system with a pervasive sense of threat and badness, and driving any number of desperate schemes to avoid the direct awareness of it. So, existential angst is a kind of, in the nervous system, a pervasive sense of threat and badness, and would drive this sense of, all these different schemes to avoid having to experience that directly, is what I meant to say. My faith anchor served me for over 30 years, allowing me to form a self-structure that helped me feel secure whenever I experienced any kind of fear. So when my faith system collapsed around me, however, I found myself encountering that fear directly. Unvarnished, undefended, and unanchored, it felt more like terror, the terror of the unknown. The point of discussing my poor potty training is not to make excuses, lay blame, or claim that my upbringing was somehow extraordinarily traumatic. My inner disturbances were mild and inadvertent, especially compared to those who have suffered so much worse. I connect the dots between how I was parented and how I failed to form a sense of self in order to illustrate something I believe is nearly universal, something that interferes with our willingness to live more in line with our souls. It has to do with the vulnerability we feel in times of significant transition, when we encounter the unknown. Or more precisely, when we encounter the state of not knowing or not being able to know. I believe my core insecurity made that primal fear so palpable that I was acutely aware of encountering it. Had I acquired a more substantial sense of self, my faith crisis might have been more of a hiccup in my development, and I could have set my religion aside as I outgrew it. Because it meant literally everything to me when I lost it, the fear I had been avoiding since those frightful times in the crib, crying out into the darkness with no assurance of connection or safety, was exposed, raw, and unshielded. It was a memory of the terror of abandonment and the vague threat of harm. The fact that there was no actual abandonment occurring was lost on me, since I was experiencing it with the mind and nervous system of an infant, toddler, preschool child. The meaning I had created at the core of myself was nonverbal and egocentric. Consequently, the memory of this fear was just as intense as I must have experienced it at the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the memory.
Yeah, so, when everything got scraped off, then that fear that I'd been protecting all that time just kind of came up to the surface. And it was kind of those old memories of just vague, body memories of threat that really weren't real, but because I was so young at the time, felt very, very real. As first worlders in the 21st century, we have been carefully trained to shield ourselves from deep vulnerability by knowing things, certainty, narratives and explanations, predictions and analyses. We have access to gobs of information, opinion, and education that strengthen the mind and undergird our hope that whatever the problem might be, we have the resources to solve it. Our thinking function therefore serves as the go-to handler of most things we encounter in our lives, and we rarely question whether our mind is the right function to employ in every situation. For most of us, the thinker is in charge, and rightly so, as long as life remains predictable and things are actually certain. As soon as circumstances get away from us and we find ourselves in the land of not knowing, the mind typically doesn't react well. For example, the gap between the doctor's call to come in for a biopsy and the lab results that tell you that that lump is benign, that gap ushers us into a whole world of mental torment. The mind simply does not know how to wait patiently for results. Instead, it conducts multiple disaster drills about your impending death, who will and will not attend the funeral, and how soon your spouse might remarry. All these drills come with concurrent levels of panic, dread, and sleeplessness. Life has a way of ushering us into the unknown quite often on several levels. Loss of a job, a career, a relationship, or a belief system can send us there and leave us there considerably longer than we would prefer. Loss of health or mobility can usher us into the unknown for major portions of our lives, and since the mind is incapable of knowing the future, much less controlling it, it tends to move into crisis mode, hyperthinking its way toward panic. I have several names for this habit, my favorite of which is making shit up. Others include running disaster drills for the 27 scenarios that may or may not happen, suffering ahead of time in order to reduce suffering later, and gazing into the crystal ball from hell. The soul, however, raise your hand. The soul, however, knows we possess other faculties, other ways of operating in the world. And while I don't believe the soul is capable of orchestrating disasters in order to teach us a lesson, it will use our circumstances in order to invite us to live differently in the midst of them. The soul knows there are some realities that can't be fully known, but must be honored and yielded to anyway. The soul's own essence is subterranean, remember? Besides, making friends with the unknown is a skill we need to acquire in order to live more fully in and through the soul. But we have a problem. We're addicted to knowing. We simply do not know how to be okay in the midst of high stakes not knowing. We don't know how to tolerate the fear that is unleashed when we encounter the unknown. For the mind, not knowing is so threatening that it will make things up and suffer needlessly for them, rather than learn how to sit with fear and make friends with the unknown. Breaking the addiction to knowing, which is the compulsion to narrate, analyze, categorize, minimize, control, and predict everything, is a basic core competency, much like sobriety is the first core competency of an addict who wants to recover. Learning you can actually function while sober is a startling discovery for many addicts, just like facing my existential fear and living to tell about it was a startling discovery and a powerful turning point for me. Developing a relationship with not knowing is what I imagine weightlessness must be like. If I could get over the fear of the loss of gravity, I might actually enjoy living that way. I may develop the skills of showering, eating, and sleeping without the benefits and encumbrances of the way things are on Earth. That could be fun. Besides, there may be some things that can only be done in zero-G. Orson Scott Card's brilliant science fiction novel, Ender's Game, illustrates this concept beautifully. Ender is a gifted child who, along with other gifted children, has been chosen to be trained in intergalactic warfare. Battle training games take place in zero gravity. Ender immediately learns that gravity-dependent methods of orientation only hinder his ability to function in zero-G. There is no up or down, no left or right, no upside down or right side up in the training room. Those who disabuse themselves of these conventions learn a whole new set of skills and strategies for warfare. Those who continue to insist on knowing which way is up remain confused and paralyzed during training. Soul pilgrimage is like that. Life happens and we find ourselves in a foreign environment. The longer we try to navigate our new environment with conventional ways of knowing, the more we will suffer and the less effective we will be. The sooner we learn to make friends with the unknown, the better we'll be able to live by the ways of the soul. Embracing the unknown is a little like learning to function in a weightless environment. Knowing helps us feel oriented, much like gravity. The sooner we can learn to exist in the zero-G of not knowing without freaking out or throwing up, the sooner we can acquire the skills that help us live in our new landless land. Your soul knows this and will eventually arrange for an initiation into the realm of the unknown one way or the other. This core competency rarely develops without the presence of personal failure or catastrophe of some sort. A breakdown or crisis is usually required to initiate the training process. In the midst of what looks like disaster, your soul will reach out with an invitation to give up the need to know and join it on the other side of fear. Fear is the gatekeeper that lives right at the threshold between gravity and weightlessness. But it's only fear. It's not the end of the world. Letting go of our resistance to that which we cannot control ushers us into a new world of learning, but only if we become friends with the unknown. Learning to tolerate long periods of not knowing, sometimes about some of the most important things, is a basic skill your soul insists you acquire. This is why the words of David Whyte helped me so much. When he suggested I could develop a relationship with the unknown, I realized that facing the fear, tolerating its presence, and living to tell about it could be a threshold, a doorway to developing the faculties I needed to navigate my life after the collapse of my existential house of cards. Before I lost my faith in God, I had a way to deal with things I did not understand. I could shrug and say God moves in mysterious ways, and since God is good, I could rest assured that all things would work out well. I didn't have to face the fear that lived in the bottom of my consciousness. Losing my faith removed my cognitive safety net. I felt as if I was falling from the trapeze, not knowing if there would be something to catch me. Hearing David Whyte's words helped me shift my attention away from looking for a net to tolerating the sensation of falling, and eventually to enjoy the weightlessness of not knowing. I didn't have to know if there was a God or not, or whether I was a universalist, an atheist, or an agnostic. I didn't know if I believed the Bible anymore, nor did I know if I believed in any of the core doctrines of the faith. Some beliefs fell off in clusters, some slipped away one by one. Some I just put on the shelf. Most I scraped away or set aside as I gave myself permission not to know. I gave myself permission not to know. It was all quite liberating eventually as I stopped trying so hard to know and just allowed myself to feel the fear. Embracing the state of not knowing enabled me to discover that just being here, just being here now, just being here now in my body, just being now here in my body holding my deepest fear was actually quite safe. I never knew that before. I was able to say to myself, it's just fear, and to let the raw sensation of fear exist in my body without the story attached to the fear, which for me was, I'm adrift in a meaningless universe and I'm about to dissolve into oblivion. I could experience it, notice it, and fully embrace it instead of grasping for something to take the fear away. I realized my fear was a body memory of something I experienced then, but was not happening now. As I allowed the fear to be present, it was able to dissipate, since the source of the fear was not based in my present reality. I was experiencing the echo of abandonment, not abandonment per se. As I practiced facing my fear in this way, I learned how to be present with it without freaking out. Well, with freaking out, but I did freak out, but then I could stay with the freak out is what I think I'm trying to say. That was a huge relief, not unlike an alcoholic detoxing for the first time, living through the stages of withdrawal and finding to their great surprise that sobriety is not the same as death. I discovered that the panic of not knowing what I believe, what my status before God might be, even if there is a God, and oh my God, what if I'm wrong about everything, is the sensation I feel when I encounter the state of not knowing. No one dies from not knowing, we just believe we're going to. Sitting on that metaphorical edge in the dark was my introduction to zero G, the idea that prolonged darkness was necessary to break my addiction to knowing helped me make it through the withdrawal process. Developing a relationship with the unknown helped me shift my attention toward what became available to me once I gave up all my theories. I found practices that helped me stay grounded in my body instead of the judgments, categories, theories, identities, or future scenarios that my mind made up to mask the fear. I learned I can survive the process of experiencing my fear directly. I learned that fear is just fear. However intensely it presents itself, fear is merely what lives at the threshold between a world governed by the laws of gravity and one that is not. Instead of having to know all the whys and hows and who am I's, I learned to hang out in the present moment without having to know what comes next. I learned how to be nourished by the blue sky, the tick-tock of the clock, and the voice of the meadowlark outside my window, instead of by the thin promises of judgment and understanding. I stopped being so afraid. I learned to release my need to settle the God thing once and for all, and to interact with the life I'm actually living instead of the life I thought I should be living. I learned how to listen to the voice of my soul and to dare, however mildly, to obey its directives without the need to know how it will all work out or what it all means. Most importantly, I learned that daring mildly counts, perhaps even more than daring greatly, because I can no longer let myself off the hook for being a chicken. If you find yourself in the midst of a crisis, existential or otherwise, consider this may be your invitation to be trained by the unknown. If you find yourself afraid of what you cannot control, consider that the fear you feel is the threshold you cross to get to the training ground. If in the midst of crisis your mind is screaming for understanding that does not arrive, consider that you have an opportunity to develop a relationship with your teacher, the unknown. If you let yourself detox in this way, you become free from the confines of gravity in order to develop a whole new set of skills more in keeping with the weightlessness of the landless land, the territory of your own soul. And then there's a poem by Carrie Newcomer, Learning to Sit with Not Knowing. I'm learning to sit with not knowing, even when my restless mind begins jumping from a worried what next to a frightened what if, to a hard-edged and impatient why aren't you already there? I'm learning to sit and listen, to pat myself on the knee, lay my hand on my heart, take another deep breath, laugh at myself, befriend my mistakes, especially the ones that showed me how I most needed to change. I'm learning to sit with whatever comes, even though I'm a planner, because so much of this life can't be measured or predicted or evenly portioned. Because wonder and suffering visit when we least expect, and rarely in equal measure. I'm learning to sit with what I might never know, might never learn, might never heal, and with what might waltz in and surprise me, might nudge me into the risky business of growing, might crash into my days with unspeakable sorrow or uncontainable delight. I'm learning to sit with not knowing. And then I have an exercise that we can do. We want to just have an example of how to sit with the unknown. So, do you mind if I record you guys asking questions? I'll make sure I'm still recording. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So, I'm not sure where to start to facilitate.
Well, I'll start first with it. I didn't sense that was super dense or
Okay, good.
confusing.
Okay, good.
Personally, that wasn't my response to it. Yeah. felt
Okay, so
clear.
you're following me. You're
Yeah,
not going
I think
more
so.
to
I mean,
biology.
it
No,
felt
no,
clear.
no.
Really
Following you.
good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Really good.
Yeah.
So what did it sort of resonate with you about what, like, what's your preferred go-to? Is it making shit up? 27 disaster drills? What any of those things are up for grabs.
I kind of remember another one that I always liked of yours called Crazy Brain.
Oh yeah, crazy brain. Just the endless.
Yeah, just cannot stop it. And, you know, I think it, you know, what I was thinking about as you were reading was skirting as you start to discover about trying to sit in the fear and how easy it is to just veer off of it and trying to keep going back to that, but that it's not easy. So
Yeah.
the uncertainties are, you know, it is fear. I mean, it's fear. It doesn't matter what it happens to be in your life. It is just this fear that feels very real. But if you can try and do some of the things that you do reach for to do, not always easy because you're trying to get over an addiction.
Yeah. Yeah, the reaching for things is not bad, right? And if there's certainty out there to be had, for sure, go get it. You know, I'm like, if you can know some things for sure, keep knowing that. You know, that's like, I'm not saying you should abandon all analysis or all knowing or all theories or all problem solving, but it's the things that you absolutely can't know and what that brings up when you're face to face with that. What we do in that juncture is kind of the pivot that we're talking about here. I think what really struck me was the lengths that most of us, a lot of my clients, myself and myself, the lengths we're willing to go, the suffering we're willing to create and endure for ourselves, to avoid feeling that fear, or to try to fix the thing that we think we're afraid of, the thing that we think is going to happen. You know, we're always trying to solve the problem, and sometimes the problem can be solved, and sometimes it can't. But when you're in the middle of, like, the classic thing is maybe you had a biopsy and you're waiting for results. There's, even if it's 2 days, even if it's, you know, a lot of times it's 2 weeks, a lot of times you have the problem and then they're trying to figure out how to, you know, the health crisis is really the biggest example because no one knows, no one can tell you. Are you going to die from this? You're going to recover from this? Is this bad? Is this good? How long are you going to live? What are you going to do? So that vacuum that opens up there when you don't know the big things like that, what kind of skill do you need? How do you be okay when you can't attach it to something? Or you could make stuff up. I mean, you could say, this is going to turn out just the right way, you know.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is, even after you get the phone call or the test results, that's kind of a false new confidence or new certitude that may make you feel better in the moment, but it's not an ultimate. It's just another prop that certitude plays because now I have the answer instead of
Yeah. In existentialism, they talk about the myth of certainty, the myth of control.
Yeah.
Because really anything could happen at any time. People could be mistaken. What we think is certain sometimes isn't. You know, if it is, great. If it's not, then, you know, you're holding on to this one thing, and if that fails, then you're trying to hold on to the next thing. And if that's not certain, then where are we going? And if we keep doing this, as opposed to learning how to live friends with, you know, in friendly relation with, or at least in some kind of relaxed relationship with this whole thing of not knowing, I think that's a what I'm trying to get at is the competency, because there are places your soul's going to want to take you, that and things I think these are theoretical. It's not like I've been to the mountaintop and I can tell you what they are, but I have this belief that once we're like engaged really in a soul-centric life, the places we'll go, the things we'll do, the people we'll know, the integration that will happen, the wholeness we get to experience, we can't get to if we're always grasping and trying to control because we're scared.
It's like the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
I maybe it's because have graphic mindset and need visuals that hold up, but it seems like I've been struggling with the mixed metaphor of that kind of weightlessness and being grounded,
Yeah.
because they're antithetical, but there's something so valuable in both of those metaphors, but I can't be grounded and weightless at the same time.
Oh, that's an interesting observation.
And so I've been weirdly conflicted about that.
Yeah. What do you think? I could blab.
Well, so what comes to my mind though is to have a loose hold on it, because I don't see them as necessarily antithetical. I think they appear to be,
Mm-hmm.
but and this gets to the Buddhist concept of attachment. It's
Mhm.
like if it's important for you that knowing actually means you're right, that's a bad place to be. If you think you're trying to know the best, and that's our tools for survival in life, we're trying to use that knowledge to get through life, but we recognize that all moments, we recognize deeply that we don't know that we're right. It's just the best information we have, and we're obligated to do our best with it. If there's not a need for it to actually be right, you have that looseness where you can, I think, both be grounded and light, right? And so you're getting rid of the need for certainty. So you're acknowledging knowledge.
That's the non-addictive approach.
Yeah. So you're
Oh,
not
oh.
attached, right?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm saying. You're
Yeah,
not
that's what you're
attached. So yeah, of course you're trying to get through life. So you're trying to have the best knowledge you can and make the best decisions you can. Of course. But to hold on to that loosely, like recognizing, but I don't really control life, or I trust that this is my basis for information. Doesn't mean I really know if they're giving me accurate information, but it's the best I have, so I'm going to go with it. Yeah, and so you can hold on to that loosely and still be very attached to the information and trying to understand and to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
Yeah.
kind of a observer, kind of.
Yeah, it's
I'm
just a
hanging out
loose-
here
yeah.
and
It's-
not grabbing on to
Right.
one particular type
Yeah.
of certainty.
The imagery that works for me with that is the sense of being sort of grounded in my core, like somehow being connected to myself, and then being weightless, being able to float around. But it's not. I'm not completely disconnected or just a fragment of something. I have that wholeness within me,
Mhm.
and being grounded in that part, which is the soul for me.
Yeah.
What just came to me too, as I was listening, is like I'm grounded on Earth, but Earth is floating
Right.
Yeah. Right.
in the universe, so I can have them both.
Yeah, yeah.
Like you said.
Yeah, I like what you said, Sherry. I think that. Well, did you see the movie Ender's Game? Did anybody
Mhm.
see the movie?
Mhm.
I'm trying to recreate the visual in my head, like, because he was like a genius at it. So he oriented right away and figured out how you build strategy and how you win the games, and so he had some sort of internal centeredness or internal knowing or some adaptability or something, so he could just do his thing. But the kids, I was thinking the kids who were still trying to be oriented to up and down, just how confused and ungrounded they felt.
Mm-hmm.
So what is grounding, and how do you accomplish that? So the ones who are, because I have a clear picture of them being in the hallway waiting to go in. Then they cross into the threshold, and then there's like disorientation and this crazy feeling, and if you're not careful, you're just like tumbling, and there's no way to get your internal, collect yourself, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Pull it in. So that's what I kind of think of when I think of grounding is do I have a hold of myself? Do I have a hold, or is my energy out there desperately trying to grasp something to hold me?
It's like an addictive energy,
Yeah.
or a more
Or is
centered.
it in the inside, you know? It's like, well, it's maybe not like, this is a stupid example, but when I fell on my bike, so I was riding, and I knew I needed to stop, but it was just at a weird angle, and I forgot to take this. I should have taken my right foot out of the little clip instead of my left foot out. So I had this foot dangling, and this foot should have been moving to the right to get out, you know, of my. I can't.
Yeah.
And so, but it pulled me anyway, because instinctively it's like, put your damn foot down, you know. And so it started pulling me over, and in that moment I felt myself going over. So it's sort of like, here we go. And I reached out to grab for something to stabilize me, which was the rail right next to me, and that grasping of that to stop the fall was the thing that broke me.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? So it did worse for me than having just, you know, I've been falling that way for a couple of weeks now. I needed to be practicing getting my right foot out of the damn clip. I had just sort of let that lapse. And so I should have been practicing that, but it's really kind of interesting just now that just, I remember that feeling of, oh crap, here we go. And then snap, bam, I'm done. And it's a sense of disorientation, and the urge to reach out and grasp something to orient you and hold you in place is fine, unless there's nothing there, or unless the thing that you reach for is the thing that's going to break your arm. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've been thinking about is maybe in the category of discerning if the things that I'm in the, what your first question is, what uncertainties keep you up at night and what do you reach for? Like, I don't know if the things that I'm reaching for are really healthy, new, like, oh, I can center and just be right here, right now. Those are the things that I feel like I'm reaching for when I'm feeling that unsettled or panicky or whatever it is. And so I'm almost shaming those things as the new certainties.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
I do. Yeah. And those are just things that are helping you get a hold of yourself.
Yes, and I've been doing things to help me get a hold of myself by telling myself God will make it turn out just fine, or whatever those things are. And so what is there a different quality to grounding or centering practices compared to the things that I've been telling myself for a lifetime? Why aren't they just morphing into something that sounds, you know, that's cooler and more new agey or something, instead of?
Well, yeah. So, for example, I don't know what exactly you're meaning, but I think what. So for me, since it was around my faith system, let's put
Sure.
it this way, and I work with a lot of people who are deconstructing and just free falling spiritually in that way, but most of the people that I talk to, the first thing they gravitate toward is, well, what am I then? What do I believe then? Well, does that mean I'm a universalist? Am I an atheist? should I be a Buddhist? Should I be something else? You know, it's like
Trying to find a
this
whole
thing
sentence
breaks
here.
down, and then you're cast adrift, and then it's like, okay, I got to figure out what I am now. So that it became really clear that way. So then I watched people who did several iterations of that. Who would say, well, we're going to do it right this time. We're going to have a community where we're doing faith the right way, kind of thing. Well, okay. But I'd already been through 27 of those. Like, I'm old now. I've been recreated that too many times.
Right.
And so that's when I first noticed that I had this aversion to it. I was like, I don't know. I feel God. I feel like I'm attached to God. I don't want to give that up. I mean, I don't have to believe God doesn't exist, but I don't know how. If I've been trying for 30 years to try to figure out what is the nature of God so I can attach to God, you know, so just wore me out, made me crazy. So I could just scrape it all off and then go, I don't know, and I don't have to know, and I don't have to know. So I think that my soul gave me a little help when it kicked me out into the dark. You know what I mean? I kind of had this little premonition or this little message from my soul. Have you heard that story? I tell this all the time where in my deconstruction I had this vision of Jesus walking me through this empty room to a doorway, and the door opens and he kind of gestures me to go ahead and go out the door. It's okay, go. So then I go out the door closed behind me, and it's completely black, dark, and I don't know if I'm on a ledge, on a cliff, or just in the dark. So I felt like that was a message from God, or message from my soul, or message from beyond, or whatever, that for some reason I'm supposed to be sitting here in the dark. And how terrifying that was. Actually, now I can say it going, well, of course, it was necessary. Of course, that makes sense. But I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if I was okay. Kind of thought I was okay because Jesus was being real nice to me. You know, it was like not out. You know, but I'm like, okay, I think I'm supposed to do this, but then I just needed to know. I was like, well, this that's them that's here. So I don't know how to keep that. I don't know how to keep the door unlocked without it being open. Do you know how to do that?
How to keep it unlocked? Well, they did a new thing, so maybe I don't.
Oh, okay. That's okay. But that's all.
Okay.
There's some kind of a event
That's happening.
that's happening out there.
out there.
Yeah, I think it's out there. I'm not sure they're coming in.
Okay.
So it's only just a little distracting. Well, it's more than a little distracting because I completely lost what I was trying to say.
Jesus kicked you out. And said,
Oh yeah.
But
So
he was nice about it.
But he was really nice about it.
He was nice about it.
So, but then the more I was out there, and the more of these, it was like these big foundational, like ideas started just collapsing underneath me, almost without my rejecting them. They were just collapsing, like the big ideas of the faith that I was rooted in. Just wow, you know. Am I okay if I don't believe this? If I'm okay what if I no longer believe? What's going to get me kicked out? Like what's going to? And it just felt like a free fall, because I think my attachment to God was as a good girl in a very transactional kind of a thing, much as I didn't want it to be. Like, I'm your best girl, and I will do anything, you know, to stay attached and to belong. And so a lot of that for me, because of the system I was in, was about believing the right things and having the right view and doing the right, you know, devotional, and showing devotion and showing passion and showing attachment all the time. So when I couldn't keep that going, then it just threatened this whole sense of, have I lost my ticket? Did I lose my ticket because I couldn't play for the team anymore? Or I got too tired or too confused or too, you know, deceived or whatever it was. So that sense of free fall was pretty scary. But I just kept thinking, well, maybe if I just sit here long enough, maybe the sun will come out or something, and I'll be able to see. But it just lasted forever and ever and ever, it seemed like. And and then when I talked to my friend, the priest, about it, and I said, here's what I saw, so here's where I am out on this ledge. He goes, exactly. And I just wanted to beat him over the head with my breakfast plate. What does it mean? What does it mean? So this sense of being drawn into something, but no ability to understand it or control it or make meaning out of it. And I'm supposed to just sit there. So do I sit there in resignation? Do I sit there in fear? Do I sit there in making shit up? How do you sit there in the not knowing? And then it occurred to me, well, maybe this something's being formed in me when I stop trying to know. And I don't know exactly what yet, but that's another thing. If I, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, I'm in the cocoon. So I might go, well, okay, I'm in a cocoon. I've heard about this cocoon thing. Okay, something's happening here. All right, well, I'm turning to goo now, but I think that's supposed to be happening. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Transformation happens, and we can't make it happen by knowing it, and we can't know what's going to be ahead. So anyway, it was pretty much my first encounter with not being allowed to know the things I desperately wanted to know, and being okay, learning the skill of being okay with that. So.
There was David White put out a poem this morning, and I only read it once through, but it really was interesting about kind of pushing into the unknown, and his thoughts were about, one God and all the gods, they're all mixed together as one, and it kind of kept going on. The line two lines that I can kind of remember were how when you go forth and you do the unknown, or you make yourself vulnerable, even though you know what the inevitability is at the end. Death is at the end. And then it was something in terms of having done that, all the gods turn to each other and talk. And it's just I wish it was very simple. It was not a long poem.
Huh.
And I forgot my phone because I was not thinking about the present.
Yeah.
But it was very interesting. I'm looking forward to going back and looking at it with all that you've said here.
Well, I want to get back to what we're trying to talk about is how do you, is even trying to get grounded a reach for something? That's kind of what you're asking, right?
Because I don't want to just throw the baby out with the bathwater. If I am in fact learning good grounding, centering, whatever you want to call it, centering practices, they have to do with the present and not future oriented. I'll be fine because I've got a bank account, or God's on my side, or some rescuer, whatever. They're very centered in the present, but it's still a reach. The reach doesn't go away.
Yeah, and I think it's a really fine line between reaching for something to stabilize you from outside you and actually stabilizing. Reaching in, being in, and not a concept, but a process or an experience of holding yourself together. So I could go through. I want to say something, but we can go through the little exercise that I have at the end. And I've described this before, but. I think the big failure of all the religions of the world, it's not like they're all a failure. It's just that...
Phyllis said they were all a failure.
That's what I heard.
Well, I mean, we're doing the best we can. They're doing the best they can. But it's so ironic to me that we place so much value on faith, on believing. But then we construct a whole system that you can consume instead of have faith. You know what I mean?
Right.
So Ted was telling me that when he graduated from seminary, he had to sign this statement of faith, and it wasn't a statement of faith; it was a statement of all their beliefs. And do you agree with these beliefs? And he's like, this has nothing to do with what real faith is, which is that courage, that trust that, oh my God, gets me to move into the unknown, right? And so how ironic it is that, and it's in every single religion, in every single kind of ism that there is trying to help us feel better about the vulnerability of being human and just the naked side of rawness and risk it is just to walk around on the planet. And so spirituality is just such a necessary foundation of our spiritual energy and substance, that sense of vulnerability and that ability, I don't even know what to call it, but to trust and to come alive in that way. But we're so scared of it that we come up with these doctrines and beliefs and things that make us go, okay, phew, if I just hold on to that, if I just believe this, or if I just do that, if I know that God is this, this, and this, then, okay, phew, then I'm not going to be abandoned. Rather than help us with practices, or I don't even know what, that can actually feed us the real thing, or help us ground or orient, when instead of, I'm going to put my hook here.
James Finley has an image of when he talks. You talk about dense writing. Oh my God, you need a pickaxe to get through his stuff. But he talks about the infinite goodness, the unknowable, complete, and he just, on top of infinite, unknowable openness, endless love that there is. And it's like a process of falling down a well, and you fall and you have this panic or sense of bliss, whichever it is, in the falling, and then you land on a ledge and you hang out there for a while and experience that level of depth until life or events or some coincidence nudges you off that ledge and you fall again. And so it's a series of falls into something that doesn't have a bottom.
Okay.
And so that's the infinite part, but we can't endure that kind of infinite falling. And so we just have this series of kind of landings. But the grace is what nudges us off of those ledges continually. But we can't cope with that. And so there are just the ledges that we continue to be on. And so that's his...
I would suggest grace is allowing yourself to fall and not clasping at the ledge as long as you can, right? I mean, that, because that falling, I think the way that you're explaining it is growth. It's actually it's a willingness, and it depends on how hard you kick and scream to stay on that particular ledge. But right, it's a willingness to be grounded. That your definition of grounding is always changing, based on observation. Based on your experience in life, based on knowing things are uncertain, and like, oh, situation has changed. I used to live in the United States. I could leave my water running. Now I'm in Africa, and I got to walk 5 miles to get water. It's a different set of circumstances. You should be different. If you try to latch too hard, you're just going to have a rough... You got to let go. You got to let go because there is not one truth.
Yeah.
If you're trying to know, you're already in a bad paradigm because there's not one truth. Your truth depends on whether your parents were alcoholic or loving. Your truth depends on whether your husband's cheating or not. Truth depends on everything. And so the best place to be is that truth is fluid.
Yeah,
Truth is
and
fluid.
that's great.
Knowing is fluid.
Oh, they're gonna.
Oh, it
Did
did lock.
lock them out.
Ah, they're like,
I
who
was-
is that girl? Who locked
Thanks
us
for
out?"
locking them out, Dawn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do appreciate it in here. We have the power. The lock's on the inside.
Well, and that's great. It's just that, sometimes, I think that when it comes to spiritual development, we can co-opt anything, even the detachment. So this is a lot of what I'm seeing when Christians are kind of shifting over into, and in the whole mindfulness movement and the whole, is that it's easy to just co-opt a new set of, we got to practice mindfulness, we got to do this, we got to be doing that, we got to be
It's
doing this, and
another-
that's the new truth.
Yeah.
That's-
Well,
right.
even though there's truth in it, it's not the same as experiencing what's happening inside of you and developing an actual relationship with the unknown. We're still trying to describe the
Yeah,
unknown
yeah.
and to be
Manage
okay.
it.
Are we done?
Do we want to move into that room? Were you only going to do 9:30 to 10?
We have an exercise.
We've got to do the exercise.
Why
Yeah,
don't
should we move in
into
there?
that room?
Okay.
And then they can come in and do their thing in that door when
right.
that closes.
Great.
It's pretty.
Thank you, Don, because I was like, I don't know
Thanks for
quite know how we're going to do
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
Yeah.
Will you help?
Yeah, maybe if you could grab that for me. I've never really been in.
I've sat in here for hours before. This is the meeting room.
It's cold. Well, having that door open too is pretty cold.
I'm not ready to give up Sandy's either.
I know.
Yeah. That's a sad time of year when you have to give up sandals. I
I
agree.
did like a wrecking ball
I
last
love,
week.
yeah.
Okay, so let's just, this is just one example. So it's kind of how, it's one way to deal directly with the experience. So I think when we're talking about the dilemma of how do we know when we're trying to ground that we're not just grabbing for something else, but we're actually kind of orienting inside of ourselves or grounding inside of ourselves. So this will help, I think, as a go-to practice, because it directly encounters the thing, the sensation and the fear, rather than the why am I failing? What do I need to know now? What do I need to remember since I'm feeling so vulnerable? What do I need to ground myself in? Those are not bad things, but we're still trying to avoid the feeling. Okay, so I don't know if you want to. It's kind of tricky to practice it because you kind of have to have something up in the moment. So let me just describe it to you. But I've done it before, so this will sound familiar. Here's an exercise you might use if you find that your fear is being activated in response to facing something you cannot know, predict, or understand. It's an exercise in experiencing your fear directly. If you tend toward panic attacks or suffer from flashbacks associated with PTSD, this exercise might be too much for you to attempt on your own. So please take care and try this in the presence of a trauma-informed professional. That's my little disclaimer. Okay, so first, notice the emotion of fear as you experience it in your body. Locate the sensation itself. Do you feel it in your stomach or lower in your gut? Maybe it's located in your heart area or near your throat. Just locate the bodily sensation. Next, notice if there's a story, a memory, or a judgment associated with this sensation. So, something bad's going to happen, I'm a bad person, something like that. Then, so notice that that's the story that's attached to it, and then just take it and set it aside. Set the narrative aside and focus only on the sensation in your body. If you need to, jot down some beliefs you encounter or memories that come up with a sensation. But the point is not to gain insight or excavate the reasons why you feel fear. The point is to become aware of the sensation that fear produces in your body. Then, exquisitely describe the actual physical sensation using whatever metaphor works. What does it feel like? Is it a spinning ball of barbed wire in your chest? That's my current favorite. An anvil sitting on your diaphragm? An overall burning sensation in your torso? A deadening in your limbs? Notice the size, the texture, the color, the density, and shape of it. Carefully described, only the sensation. And if the story creeps back in, any judgment creeps back in, just set it aside and go back to the sensation. Then, imagine yourself crawling inside the sensation itself, taking up occupancy there. Stop trying to distance yourself from the sensation in your body, but instead embrace it completely. Again, only the sensation, not the story or the belief. If thoughts, memories, or judgments arise, set them aside and return to noticing the sensation. And notice what happens when you stay focused on the sensation in your body. Only the sensation, not the story. And then breathe into the sensation and notice what happens. Most often you will feel the sensation shift in some way or dissipate altogether. Stay with it and notice what happens. Many of us have little experience allowing fear to surface and processing it properly. We try to suppress it, deny it, or otherwise avoid it simply because we have never learned how to be safely present with it long enough to witness it resolve itself. Now place your hand over your heart and affirm yourself for being brave. Take a few deep breaths and imagine love and comfort flowing directly into your heart as you breathe. Congratulations, you just crossed the threshold into 0G, however briefly. Notice you didn't have to explain, deny, plan, or pathologize yourself. All you did was sit inside your fear and watch it dissipate. This is a good first step in making friends with the unknown. So the thing I like about that is that you're centering where you're experiencing it, and then Janine Roth talks about when you do that, there's a you that's fearing, and then there's a you that's observing it, and a you that's entering it. So it's like immediately you're seeing the multiple competencies that you have, and that wise mind and that soul can step right into it. So it creates this: I'm not my fear, I am not my catastrophe. I am present with a thing that's happening in me. And then secondly, you find out I encountered it directly, and guess what? I didn't die. I went inside of it and I survived. And this honestly is like the big revelation for a lot of people. They're always, if I go there, it'll just drown me. It'll just take me out. It'll just, will it really? It's just fear. So let's just go there. So you occupy it, and you allow it, which is really all strong emotions want anyway. Like the real ones, all they want is just to be allowed, and they get to come out and be resolved. So instead of going up here and ending the curve of the emotional energy wave, instead of stopping it, we're letting it naturally, move through us. So it's a great way to bypass all that therapy. Go straight to the sensation and learn that, I did it. I crawled in there. Mm-hmm. I survived.
And it's what it's doing is giving you a separation. If you choose to observe it, you by definition aren't it.
You aren't it, right?
Yeah.
And so, and
Yeah.
the part of you that is climbing in there is basically the stronger, wiser,
Willing.
Yeah.
willing part of you, and so that's when Janine Roth talks about how you encounter the part of you that can never be broken, that can never be defeated, that can never be destroyed. You're touching that part of you, that blazing presence that is in the present, and it has a. So my experience with working that thing is that it can be kind of vague. Like what I want is a big aha. What I want is a big resolution.
Mm-hmm.
What I want is this, oh, now I remember. I'm loved and accepted and the universe embraces me as I am. And maybe you can, maybe that's great. But in general, when you're with a sensation, all it does is move through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
I agree.
the thing that you just described, that now I'm, is part of the addiction of the addictive construct of worship, or I'm good with God, or I know how it's all, I know enough to. It's that addictive tie to the knowing part, instead of like, no, I'm actually. Yeah, I've broken that tether.
I mean, it's okay if those kind of insights come. It's okay if you suddenly remember, oh, wait a minute, I'm a glorious being of light, or I'm connected to all that there is. It's okay if that happens. It's not wrong that it happens. It's that you're actually probably stepping into what's really real anyway. But what we're really talking about is, what we're trying to cultivate is the willingness to stick with the fear and to survive it.
Yeah.
Whether or not there's an answer.
And it's a book, right? So the way I like that I've heard her recently, and I think I've heard it on radio too, but I like the idea, and this is letting go of certainty. It's okay not being okay.
Yeah.
Because I know when I've had fear, it's been well based. I've been lost in the mountains or something like that.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't. You don't get an aha. It doesn't go away. But I do. I know exactly where I get it right here. It's a little bit of a knot that feels a little bit like drinking soda. It's a little bubbly. It's got a little knot there. And and it's like, it's okay. Yeah, this is a serious situation. Yep. And I have to, and I make sure that I don't have I make sure I don't get a panic rise, because I'll feel it starting to, and I'll be like, hold on, and it's just everything you say. You breathe through it, you observe it, you let it go. I'm not discounting it. It's there for good reasons. Yep, this is a bad situation. It's okay not being okay. And so that's, whatever bringing on the fear, that's the point. And I think a problem with faith is, at least at the young level, is, oh no, God's going to make it right. Everything's going to be great. It's like, no, if you can let go of that part, of it, it's acceptance. It's not that it's going to be okay. It's like whatever happens is okay.
Whatever
Yeah.
it is okay.
Yeah.
And I can be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been, doing some different programs that have apps, and one of them is about anxiety, angst, and using, meditation and, metas, and kindness type things, and the way that they that they put it forth is like you're riding the surf. You're in the surf.
Surfing the wave.
You're surfing the wave, and it is turning into it, and going and keep going through till you're at the end, and you've gotten through it, which is interesting. It is something where they also have where you check in with yourself, through the day type thing of recognizing when you've let something really kind of grasp you, and the burning, for me it's burning in my stomach, and when you're feeling them, stop and start to look, what is it that's making that happen, and what is it that you're fearing right at this moment. It's interesting to start doing more of a practice of it. but it's, you know, I don't know what else, you know, at this point to, I mean, that's what I reach for at this point. I don't know if that still is an addictive type of
Well, the-
process. Or
I think
About the
let's not.
addictive thing is, yes, there is that, like, oh, that sigh, I am going to be okay. But if, I would say for me, if I'm attached to that glorious, that blissful outcome, that's the addictive energy. I have to center or breathe or get a quiet place or something so that I tell myself super aggressively all of these happy feeling things. That's a freaking addictive energy.
Oh, okay. I get what you're
You know?
saying.
But if I sit in that terrifying, climb inside of it, and then it passes and dissipates, of course there's a relief on the other end. And that's lovely. And I'm grateful. But I can't go in there like, oh my God, I gotta get there. Because that doesn't make it good.
Yeah, it reminds. What I was chuckling about was it reminds me of George Costanza saying "Serenity now, Serenity now." Remember that episode?
Oh, I don't. I love it.
Yeah, just kept.
Nice.
Yeah, 'cause
Nice.
and that's a lot of self-help stuff. Is
Nice.
that
Yeah.
find the affirmation it's going to work for you, and then just
Exactly.
chant it over and over and over until you feel
Right.
better.
Right.
Well, that's dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you got to give yourself grace for where you're at. So if you're falling and you land on a ledge, that's a grace, and you can stay there for a while. Stay on the ledge.
Mm-hmm.
And your soul, the idea is that your soul really is in touch with what this movement is and knows what you need, invites you always to learn how to, this is going to sound so cheesy, but falling and flying are very similar kind of things, and when mother birds teach their birds to fly, they just kick them out of the nest, right? And they just fall first, but then they flail and then they get it, and then they learn.
But it's
The
only by
skill.
that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in a sense, they get grounded in who they are. Oh, I'm a bird. I fly. Kind of, or some. You just while you're flailing, you learn the skills, and that's what I wish I could articulate a little bit more. What are the skills of living a soulful life? And I don't know, because I'm still working at the threshold of the fear. It's just this theoretical idea that there's lots I can learn if I can just, give myself permission to not know these things.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and if you succeeded in knowing who you were as a child, you'd always be a child if you stayed there.
Yeah.
So if you succeeded being in high school and knowing who I am, you'd be still the mindset of a high school person. So the fact is there is no am. It's not it shouldn't be a static place. Shouldn't be a static place.
What else? What
I just love the bicycle analogy too. Just in until you feel the imbalance, you don't know how to live in the equilibrium of riding a bicycle. And so you have to have that's Richard Rohr quotes that all the time. The way you learn to ride a bicycle is you can't have two perfectly balanced training wheels, or you won't learn how to make the adjustments and corrections. And I use that all the time with my students because they just are like, oh my gosh, I was out of control. I was like, yeah, but you felt it. That's good. Make the adjustment. It's that feeling that's instructive, and make friends with that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and I love talking about it in terms of perceived failures too, because we need to make friends with the whole failure narrative and self-defining, catastrophic. Oh no, after an exam or
Yeah, we're so locked into what we think things should be that we're so traumatized when they're not that way, and that's just no way to live.
yeah.
We can try, but it's not going to serve us very well.
I'll just end with, I've not been sleeping, so I've been listening while I'm staying awake at night, which is kind of nice. I've been listening to David White again, and he tells this story when he's talking about making friends with the unknown. He has this phrase he uses, we need to develop a robust vulnerability, which I really love that phrase.
Yeah, that's a good
Robust
phrase.
vulnerability.
Yeah.
He tells a story when he used to be like a biologist and a different career, and he was feeling the move to be a poet, which is kind of like the dumbest move ever. If you're working for, an organization and then you're going to launch yourself as a poet, and so he had these few gigs at the beginning, and his first big gig, whatever it was, he was going to be at this conference, and he was supposed to be one of the main speakers at this conference. And when he got there, he wasn't supposed to speak till like day 3 out of this day 4 conference or whatever. As soon as he got there, he started getting sick, and he got just deathly ill. And he was in his room, just whatever it was, being sick. I don't know what kind of sick he was, but he was supposed to speak on like a Friday morning or Friday afternoon. And so Thursday night, he's like, what am I going to do? I have to speak tomorrow. And he goes, well, I'm too tired. I can't. I'll just do it in the morning. I'll get up in the morning, and then hopefully I'll feel better and good enough to really prepare. So he gets up in the morning. He's still feeling bad, but they come to him and say, Mr. White, would you be able to speak this morning instead of this afternoon? We've had, something, we need to rearrange you. So he literally goes into the venue completely blank, like sicker than a dog, can't think, but he's at the podium. And so he basically describes how he just starts talking, and as he's talking, it starts coming out, and as it's whatever was cooking in there starts coming out without his preparation, then the better he feels, and kind of by the end of the day he's all better. But that experience was an initiatory experience of the trust it takes and the robust vulnerability to just show up and not be able to control the thing. So I just thought you kind of have to live these things if you're going to live your life oriented around that. So we have these initiation experiences. Mine was kind of my faith experience. I'm sure there'll be 27 others because I'm scared of every little thing. But getting to the edge of that and then crossing the threshold is that core competency skill that I'm trying to find ways to communicate. So, any last thoughts? We can be.
I think it's going to be a good chapter.
I hope so. Okay, great. I don't know if that's the end or not. Nope, it wasn't.